me great pleasure to be sitting here beside a writing phenomenon. I'm going to use that word advisedly, Mr. Adrian Tchaikovsky. So please show your appreciation. I'm going to kick things off with a nice, easy, gentle question to break you in.
Okay.
Actually, before we get to that, I believe you're going to give us a brief reading, aren't you?
If that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to read just a couple of pages from Newcomb Press's own Tales of the App Volume 1, Spoils of War. This is set in my long-running fantasy world, the world of the Insect Kingdom, and it's the story Dreams of Avarice. Rovan was a tough guy. Merrick was a killer, and Skessy was just an annoyance, and they were the bad part of the deal. But me and my partner had been in wasp cells at the time, and finding a couple of wasps willing to go absent without leave for a private errand had been all the luck we could scrape together. It's better than slavery. I've been born poor in Sienis, way down south, and I know everything that one spider can teach another about slavery. I was bought and sold from when my mother had parted with me at age 5 to when I'd cut the throat of the latest merchant to offer me for sale. And I fled the Spiderlands after that because the merchant was an Aristoy man. Back then, the Commonweal had seemed a nice, peaceful place to pull a few scams and get rich. It was right before the Wasp Empire got the same idea, only on a much larger scale. From that point, the Dragonfly Commonweal had become an overly exciting place, and I'd have made tracks south or north or anywhere if not for the money. There was money in other people's suffering. The Wasps were chewing up great tracts of Commonweal land, scooping up whole villages worth of slaves, winning hard-fought battles, enduring the keen Commonweal winters. They were men, those Wasp soldiers, and men had needs. A light-footed trader in certain luxuries could make a living out of drink and whores and second-hand dragonfly souvenirs. But watch my step. Watching one step was a difficult proposition, even for a spider-born. The Wasp officers had short tempers. Every so often a trader in dubious goods would be taken up, stock confiscated and leg irons applied with professional speed and care. There was no appeal. The Wasp recorded other kindred no rights, not even the status of a human being. Everyone else was fair prey. My name's Avarice, and I've never stayed still long enough to have to change it. My partner was a lean old dragonfly called Gatro Fail, who'd been robbing his kinsmen up and down the roads and canals since long before the Wasps took an interest. Our game was black guild trading and a lot of different versions of selling the monarch's crown to people, which makes sense when you know there's no such thing. But you'd be amazed how many people don't know. We've been working together 3 years now, my mouth and his knowledge of the land, until we landed up in the northeastern end of the Principality of Seal Men, and in irons, and in trouble. We'd done a fair trade and had missed just one step. We'd passed through wasp camps, peddling our seedy wares, bringing flesh and fire water to bitter, bloodied soldiers who'd been fighting, some of them, a full 10 years, without seeing their homes and wives. It was not that the war was going badly. To the generals and the folks back home, it was stride after stride of victory for the legions of black and gold. To the soldiers, it was fighting a numberless and fiercely determined enemy, bringing imperial rule to village after village of bitter, surly peasants. Months of trail rations and half discipline, the bite of each year's snow and ice, the red-washed memories of what war had made them do. Even Waspkind had started to feel the bloodstains after 10 years without mercy. We never knew what it was that had seen us taken up, stripped of our goods and slung into slave cells. It was simply one of those things that happened to people that you heard about, and this time the people it happened to were us. We planned for this, though. Gatray Fail had a caper, a good one. We'd been waiting months to spring, and with slavery our only other option, why not spring it now? Riches beyond riches, Fail had said. Riches beyond riches indeed, but our target was behind Wasp lines now, and somehow it had never seemed worth the journey. It'll be worth the journey, I'd explained to Rovan and Merrick. It's a fair step, but riches, Sergeant, riches. They used to bury them well heeled back in the bad old days. It helped that Rovan, the sergeant, had heard something of this. He opined offhand that some officer in the engineers he knew had struck old gold excavating some Commonweal lord's broken-up castle. Vaults of it, he said. Just bodies and gold. Merrick had looked interested. I don't know, though, Gatray Fail had said, his lean face twisting the colour of gold itself. Disturbing the dead? Disturbing the dead what? Rovan had grunted. Dragonfly had shrugged. They say bad things happen when you open the oldest tombs. The makers protected their wealth with curses, and the dead aren't always that dead. And the wasps had sneered at that, and the seed was planted in their minds.
It's wonderful because as you were reading that, I could remember the story and picture the whole story. It's a very good story, so thank you. So I want to start with a fairly open and straightforward question, and just to break you in gently to this evening's proceedings, and that's why insects and spiders? What is it about them that about these creepy, crawly invertebrates that fascinates you?
Well, I used to have this long spiel about there being a long, especially East European tradition of using insects to show off the human nature. So you have Pelevin and you have Kafka and the Brothers Chapek and that kind of thing, and you could make it out to be this grand literary thing of turning the mirror onto ourselves, and that's all nonsense, basically. Because I just like insects. And even back in primary school, I would always make any work I had to do about insects, or I would draw insects in the margins, or whatever I could do just to turn the thing into my own personal interest. And they said I would never get me anywhere.
Yes, and just to endorse this, Adrian and his wife Annie stayed with us a few months back, and there was this spider, and instantly Adrian was there identifying the spider. It really does seem to be a genuine passion with you.
Yep, and I wouldn't have written anything I've written, I think, without that driving me. It's proved to be really rather useful.
Excellent. The story you read from, which is from the first Tales of the Apt book, I mean, this collection pretty much, on the whole, it predates the early parts of the Shadows of the Apt decology. Is that the correct word? Decalogy? And 10-book series. Let's go with that. So this is things that more or less set the scene for a lot of what happens in the novels to start with.
Yeah, and it's for anyone who's worried, should be able to dive into this without having read any of the other novels.
Thanks for doing a great job of plugging in your compressors. It's impossible to talk about your work without talking about the Shadows of the Apt and the Insect Kingdom. And something that's always fascinated me, I mean, the first 4 books, you open in Empire in Black and Gold and you hit the ground running. Mm-hmm. There's action, there's arrows flying, there are people flying and stings going and everything, which is a great way to hook you and bring you into the world. And those characters who you introduced to us in those early scenes, they more or less stayed with us throughout the first 4 books. And at that point, it seems that their story arc more or less comes to an end. And from there, you go into something else. Was it originally intended to be a 10-book series, or were you just planning on having it as 4 books? And what happened?
Well, the first 4 books were written before we got the publishing deal, basically. So that was what I gave to Simon over there, actually, as happens.
It's your fault.
So that, and obviously at that point there was no guarantee we'd get any more, so that was our arc, and if it had stopped there, it's still a fairly satisfactory place to stop. I always knew there was a lot more in the world, and a lot of places the story would go, but a lot of the story in books 5 and onwards is quite reactive to the decisions I ended up making during the book, or to the decisions that the characters ended up making. So the way the plot goes from that is really quite organic. It's
right.
sort of just a cascade of logic that sort of leads on from the
So
plot.
you didn't specifically have it planned out as a 10-book series at that point. You knew there was the potential for more, but you'd got the 4 books, and if that was it, then at least you had an ending there. Although you knew there was a lot more that could follow on. That's interesting, to leave it open-ending. Good tactic, I like that, yes. For anyone who isn't familiar, by the way, we dive straight into this assuming that people are familiar with Adrian's work, and it may be that some of you aren't, but Shadows of the Apt is a fantastic series which in many ways has aspects of traditional fantasy, but you also mix in steampunk and all sorts of other things, and then again your love of insects. How long in the planning was this? How long before all this came together?
Well, the seeds of Shadows of the Apt were planted in what must have been about 92, 93 in a role-playing game, a campaign I was running in university. So the world got set out then, which I think is, if you're lucky enough to have that advantage, it's a fantastic way of getting a fantasy world up and running, because you do a lot of thinking about what goes where and how everything works, which means that then writing the books and just having people go around the places I was already familiar with was far easier than it normally is, as I've discovered writing later stuff. And so, I mean, a lot of the characters turned up in that game. A lot of the events, certainly the first few books, hark back to things that happened in that campaign.
Well, that's interesting because you're not the only fantasy author who's based things in games of Raymond Feist and various others. It seems to be a well-known path to go, and certainly I was very impressed when I first read the Shadows of the App, the early volumes. The sense of place you achieved in Collegium and Elleron and other places was extremely vivid, and possibly that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird now because I was living in that world, I guess, as a writer for basically 8 years straight. But yet, I think I had a fairly solid feel for pretty much everywhere I went, and because of the particular way my characters and my plots tend to arise out of the world rather than the other way around. So I found it very easy to produce the characters and even to inhabit quite minor roles because I knew where they had come from, I knew their society and their background and the attitudes they would have grown up with. I had really an incalculable wealth of experience with the world even before I pen to paper.
And it shows, I say, that there's a really very vivid sense of the whole setting when you get into the stories. You approached me a few years ago about the possibility of doing the Tales of the App series. What was your reasoning in doing those? Having completed the Shadows of the App, you've got this big 10-book series, and anyone who's seen these books, these are not slender books. These are big books. So it's a lot of pages. So what was the reasoning behind the Tales of the App series?
Well, I'd written, on the way through, I'd written quite a lot of stories already, some of which, just effectively for myself, some for other short story collections. And I was frequently using the stories to explore times and places that the books didn't get to go. And I had a bunch of others on the drawing board written that had not been seen at that point. So it just felt the natural thing to do, really, to try and draw them all together and be able to give people that extra sort of insight into the world.
Having read sort of and edited the first book and the second one, which, quick plug, is coming out at Easter, the second volume, by the way, just that I've mentioned that. Having done that, I will say it seems to give almost an alternative view of the history, because you're seeing it from characters who perhaps disappear off stage during the books, and you're finding out what happened to them and events that supported things that happen in the novels. So it really does fill out the background and give a lot more texture to the whole tale of the Shadows series.
Yeah, so, in the second volume there are two stories about the rather dangerous life of academics in the world of the Insect Kingdom, which is not something that the main novel series gets the chance to touch on, but it's one of the things, well, I knew it was there, I knew this was going to be a thing, so it's really nice to be able to explore the world in ways that aren't going to get in the way of the main narrative.
Now, we're focusing so far on the Shadows of the App, the world of the Insect Kingdom, but I discovered when I first heard you read something at an EasterCon, I think it was, or maybe a FantasyCon, and what you read was something completely different, a short story that was humorous and set in a very, very different world. So, not everything you write. And by the sound of it, we've got a collection of stories from your early days here, and you're going back almost to traditional horror and adventure stories in some ways, which is very different from what the Kindle emerged as.
Not everything I write is covered in bees. Well, it's... And one of the reasons I've gone... So one of the reasons I wrote, for example, Guns of the Dawn after the Kingdom stories, or anywhere else I've gone since then, obviously the ideas keep coming. A lot of those ideas are never going to fit in the world of the Kingdom. And so, short stories is always a very good way of getting those ideas out there, of exploring things, especially things where you're touching on the real world, because most of my back catalogue is secondary world fantasy, so sometimes you do want something that's got that just a bit more on the nose kind of relevance or reference to something that is going on here and now.
You mentioned earlier that part of the whole Shadows and the Kingdom world emerged from games you were playing at university, and I know that going on into your more adult, that sounds terrible because it implies you weren't adult at university, but as you've grown older, you've progressed with that. Okay, fair comment. You've progressed further into LARP and live action role playing, etc. Is this something that you think impacts or helps you in some of the things you're writing?
I think there are a lot of tabletop practices that really, really help. I think playing a character is a very good kind of school of character development, if you're actually inhabiting them in that way and making those decisions kind of from the driving seat. And I think that, as I said, the ability, if you're running a game, the ability to create the world and the detail you have to create the world in, because you know your players aren't going to be like book characters, that they're going to go places you don't necessarily intend, so you have to have that backup knowledge. I think that's an enormously valuable sort of practice for them going on to write worlds, to create worlds to write in.
And one question I meant to ask you while we were on the Shadows of the App, because it's something that's always fascinated me, is in that series you make the Wasps not the villains, but certainly early on they're the aggressive protagonists. Is that something to do with our own reaction to Wasps, or was it coincidence?
When I was about, I think probably 6 or 7, I happened to run over an underground wasp's nest, and I lost about half an hour of memory. So I don't know what happened then, but it's not exactly rocket science. And so yeah, I spent most of my childhood absolutely terrified of wasps. So I guess kind of pinning them down in the pages of the book is cathartic, I suppose.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, so having spent 8 years immersed in this very vivid, very complex world of the Kingdom, which seemed to get more complex and more involved the further you went into the series, inevitably, you finished it, you'd written the series, you then suddenly came up with this whole splurge of standalone novels in very different areas. I mean, I said earlier that the Kingdom books weren't necessarily your traditional epic fantasy because they had other elements in it, but there was the and what a surprise that there seems to be some sort of creepy crawly name in this, Spiderlight.
Yes.
and that was surely far more of a traditional fantasy than the Kingdom books have been in many ways.
Actually, weirdly, in a way, it almost... I mean, Spiderlight is what I call a deconstructionist fantasy, because it's written to be very aware of the tropes of a traditional fantasy quest narrative, and to basically turn them all inside out, and to look at them from the point of view of a reluctantly recruited giant spider. And so...
As you do.
Stay with your strengths, you know. But in a way, I think because of the way it deals with the genre tropes, it's potentially a less traditional fantasy than Shadows of the App. Because Shadows of the App, I think, still has that big epic fantasy sweep, even though it's dealing with a lot of potentially more science fictional qualities, like the march of technology and the kind of the arms race you get between the collegiates and the wasps. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what's the most traditional thing I've read. I've written because I guess the Tiger and the Wolf is.
I'm the one who asks the questions here.
Sorry.
No. Okay, so you've got Spiderlight, and then you've also got Guns of the Dawn, which was, I mean, I've seen described as flintlock fantasy, but it seems to have a far more historical feel to it than anything else.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cheat in a way, so I didn't have to do the research. But it's a secondary world, but it's very obviously a secondary world that's strongly based on the very early 19th century, the Napoleonic War, with a bit of other wars thrown in. I mean, a friend of mine described us as Pride and Extreme Prejudice.
Did that achieve what you wanted it to?
Yeah, I was enormously pleased with that. I mean, I was very proud. It got on the British Fantasy Society shortlist for the Holdstock Award, which I was absolutely delighted with. And yes, I mean, it's certainly in the running for, I think, my favourite thing I've written.
Right. I have to confess I haven't read it yet, so this is down on the list of things to read, so thank you. Thank you for that recommendation.
It's very good. It's very
excellent,
good.
Thank you. Straight from the horse's mouth, as they say. Yes. A couple of years ago I commissioned a story for you for one of the Solaris Rising series, and you sent me in something that was hard science fiction, which was Feast and Famine, the title story of this. I just thought I meant that. But it took me by surprise in a sense, because it wasn't your typical Adrian Tchaikovsky story. It revealed a side to you that I wasn't aware of before, which is your love of SF.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got a science background. I've always, I mean, when I was growing up, I read science fiction far more than fantasy. I probably didn't really start reading fantasy per se until I was about 16 or 17, I think. So for all my formative years, it was all about the spaceships and things like that. And there's a very different challenge, I think, to writing science fiction compared to writing fantasy. And writing fantasy, the challenge is to produce that world that is internally consistent but doesn't need to be externally consistent. Whereas I've got quite a conscience on me, I think, about the science. So if I'm writing something that is theoretically happening within our universe and is happening to people like us, I want to try and get the science right, or at least I want to try and get it reasonably plausible for someone who knows about as much of the science as I do.
Yep.
And there's always someone who will basically, as has happened with a number of points in Children of Time, turn up and say, well, this doesn't really work the way you put it there. But they're the limit to how far you can go down that rabbit hole, I think.
You just mentioned your third standalone that you produced during this. I'm getting away from writing a huge book series. Let me write what I want to, which is Children of Time, which is a science fiction novel which is so unlike anything else you've ever done because it had in it spiders. Shocking. So, how did this come about? Where did this emerge from?
So the spiders in Children of Time, which is, they are notionally science fiction spiders rather than the fantasy spiders. They're completely different, obviously, to all my other stuff. They come from real spiders. So you have a species of spider, Portia labiata, which has absurdly complex behaviour, pathfinding, problem solving, which is pretty much described realistically in one of the very early chapters of the novel. So all of that is real. And I basically came across this and pretty much fell in love with them. Because the thought came, well, what if they had the chance to evolve? What would you get if you just left that spider alone to approximate human intelligence? What sort of, what would their technology be? What would their society be? And that was the germ for that book. And obviously, the book is kind of into interspersed halves. So you have a human narrative and a spider narrative, but the spider narrative very definitely came first, and it's based on that real animal. I
have to say that I think the spider narrative and the whole development of that species that you delineate in the book is superbly done. It hooked me entirely. I thought it was brilliant. And the weird thing for me was that I'd read these opening chapters where you actually discussed the whole idea of the spider, which, as you say, is based very much on an earthly thing. And about a week later, I saw a David Attenborough programme which covered exactly the same things. I'm glad I did it in that order. I'd have thought you'd have cribbed off him. No,
who cribbed off who?
Well, this is the question. Yes.
Well, technically, we both cribbed off nature, but
Yeah. Yes. But it was a fantastic book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was fortunate enough to be one of the people who judged it for the Clarke Award, as was Mr. Gullen over there. And despite that, you still managed to win the Clarke Award, for which I'm very But had you any idea that you were writing a book that could possibly challenge for that sort of award at the time?
No, I didn't really think I was writing a book that my publishers would want to publish. Well, I mean,
it must have been a hard sell because it was so different from anything else you've done.
There's that, and also it's just spiders. I mean, I like spiders, but I'm kind of aware that most people really don't. So it was always going to be a hard sell, and I honestly thought, it was this weird little personal project. I was writing it kind of in the spare gaps while writing, I think, probably the last 2 books of Shadows of the Apt. And it was just a thing I really, really wanted to do. And it's amazing it got into print. It's amazing it's done as well as it had, because that is probably the most personal project I've worked on.
You were saying that there are 2 storylines, and they run in parallel, but they are 2 stories. Did you literally write the spider one first and then come back and write or was it something you wrote in tandem?
I don't think I'm a very, very I only ever really write things in the order they're going to appear in the book. I mean, barring
Right.
kind of obviously editorial decisions.
So you write in a very linear fashion.
And obviously, because the two storylines bounce off one another
Yeah.
with theme and so forth, it's so much easier just to write. There's that bit and that bit. And also, I think also it helps because when you've got those two narratives, it means you're always getting a break.
Yeah.
So you run one as far as it's going to run, then you
Yeah.
can immediately jump onto the other.
Oh,
and
no,
then
that
by
helps
that time,
enormously,
you've kind of
yeah.
refreshed on the first one.
I mean, that helps enormously. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be writing 2 novel series at the same time, a science fiction space opera one and an urban fantasy one. And it was great that I could finish one book and wash my hands of that for 6-7 months and do the other one. That worked really well, so I can sympathise on that, certainly. Children of Time was a great book. It was very interesting for me because I don't doubt it sold really well beforehand, but when it won the Clark Award, it actually seemed to catapult forward in sales terms. So
Just a little, yeah.
yes. So I mean, that's something, and Tom's not here, bless him, but that's something that really validates the whole process of what the Clark Award represents. It shows that people are paying attention, and as a result, hopefully, you saw a kick-on effect in some of your other titles as well, I'd imagine, because Children in Time did so well. Presumably, other people want to read more of your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd thing with, I think, the Clarks above all of the other genre awards have a mainstream recognition. I mean, and my wife Annie was saying, before she kind of fell in with me, she wasn't really a science fiction person, but it was something she'd heard of. It was something she was aware existed, whereas a lot of the other awards are far more, I think, within genre. So they're very, very highly respected there, but they're not necessarily something you
It doesn't
hear about.
doesn't cross over the boundary into mainstream awareness. Well, something to just support that. I know that when Loddon Bucas won her Clark Award a few years back, it actually got mentioned in South African Parliament. it wouldn't it be, I don't seem to remember Children of Time getting the same sort of, but maybe one day. Okay, so when I very first met you, it was when you started attending conventions, and I was aware of this very quiet, quite withdrawn, very intelligent individual who would stand back and make humorous and often worthwhile comments in the background. You seem to come out of your shell quite a bit in those years.
I get a lot of imposter syndrome, and I still do, to be honest. I mean, I didn't go to conventions at all before it got published.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm weirdly, I'm kind of glad I did, because I think I would have been a bit of a nightmare, because I would not being published. I mean, it took me 15 years of trying to get into print, and during those 15 years, I think I was starting to go a bit crazy because of it. I suspect I would have ended up blacklisted by every publisher in the world eventually by just making a nuisance of myself and putting manuscripts in their bags and that kind of thing. But also, I think the only thing that really gave me the courage to even turn up at an assembly of other writers was having the first book in the bag. Just knowing there was this tactile evidence that I felt I'd earned my right to be there, and that is absolute nonsense. You don't need that, and you don't. And you can go along to these things, and it's actually, I mean, if you are somewhat more socially accomplished than I was or indeed am, you can obviously make a lot of contacts there, and potentially that can be the thing that actually that gets you through the gate. But I think as a confidence issue, as a self-confidence issue, I had enormous problems in the past, and it took me quite a while to basically get to the point to accept that I was kind of allowed to say things.
You belong there. Yes. Well, along those lines as well. I mean, I can recall that I'd known you for a few years, and suddenly one, I think it was one of the Gemmell Award ceremonies. Suddenly you said, "Oh, by the way, this is my wife, Annie," and suddenly there was Annie beside you, and this quiet, retiring wallflower. Has involving Annie in the whole convention side of things in the community, has that helped you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, Annie is way better with people than I am. So if people, if I'm going with Annie, she can generally break the ice and sort of make the running in conversations when I can't. also, it's one of those, as things have gone on, the demands on my time and the things I want to go and do as an author have got more and more, and I think it would have been a bit of a strain, to be honest, if I basically just kept it all to myself.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously, she comes to conventions, she has a lot of friends on the genre, so it's something that we share rather than something that I think is just sort of weighting down my end of the marriage.
What a terrible image! What a terrible image. That's something I want to come on to, because of course, as well as writing, this is what you do full time. You actually have, and being a husband and being a father, you actually have a job.
Most of a job. I work as a lawyer. I'm just about to go down to 3 days a week, cross fingers.
And presumably this is because the writing is beginning to, or not beginning to, but is becoming increasingly self-supporting, and you can afford to perhaps cut down on that aspect?
Also because I'm getting old and increasingly more jealous of my time, and I want to spend it doing things that I actually kind of I want to do, and I want to spend more time writing, basically. I mean, that was, I started off going down to 4 days, and I just not really looked back then.
So you managed to balance this basically by cutting back on the boring bits and concentrating on the more interesting ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very firm about not taking the work home. I think that's what when I've left the office, right, I'm my own man. I'm going to do writing or whatever, and when I'm in the office, I'm in the office. But I think it's that having that firm division is probably essential, because otherwise things will creep in. I think you need to make time.
Do you make the same divisions regarding your writing and family, or does that more or less bleed into each other continually? I ask this because I have the same.
No, it absolutely can do, and I mean, Annie is very understanding, and basically when I'm on a writing day, I mean, my natural writing time is very late evening, which obviously helps because generally I'm the only person up. But when I'm on one of my writing days, that's it. It's not a day that kind of gets poached for other things.
Right.
It's effectively it becomes a work commitment that you've got to stick to.
One thing which is slightly off piece, but I've been fascinated to ask, so I might as well do it in front of loads of people, is you very kindly for the past few years have sent me the most amazing calendars of your own design. So tell me, how did these calendars come about?
Well, if you'll recall me talking about doodling in the margins at school.
I do, yeah.
My cartooning style is almost entirely the product of a very, very boring year's geography lessons.
I can relate to that, yeah.
And again, I started off doing cartoons of characters in role-playing campaigns, and it just kind of expanded from that. But yes, I was also, for about a year and a half, I did a comic strip running on the BBC Berkshire website.
Oh, I never knew that.
When
was this?
God, that was late 90s. Called Smash the System, which is my vaguely Dilbert-esque office environment comic. But I mean that it's I'm not necessarily very good, but it's something I enjoy doing, and it means I don't have to think about what Christmas presents to buy people.
Your efforts are always appreciated. They're great. It's up above my workstation every day. Okay, getting back a bit. Should we talk about writing for a change? Let's get back to that. Yeah, let's go back on that. So you had this enormous series, the app series, incredibly complex world that took up 8 years of your life. You then came out of this in a mad splurge, fired off fantasy, historical, science fiction, all over the place as standalones. You're now buckling down to a, traded word, series again.
Well, technically I've buckled down, done it and
2
unbuckled.
books. Oh, is that it?
No, but the third book has been delivered, so that's and this one is only 3 books, because I'm not doing another 10-book series.
This is thank you. That's the next question. I gather. I mean, you've got shape shifting in these. You've got other traditional fantasy things. Again, was this a deliberate setting to make a very different world from the app?
It is a very different world for the app, but not necessarily for that reason. It's a world where everyone's a shapeshifter. That's the basic premise, and all of the world building kind of grew out of that, because just that, well, how would that change things? It's also a world where, because traditional fantasy is often very, very reliant on secondary worlds that are informed by medieval Europe.
Right.
Whether it's a sort of a direct historical pastiche or whether it's just simply something where you tend to have the same kind of institutions, the same kind of social structures.
And cultural references. Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to do with the Echoes of the Fall series, started with the Tiger and the Wolf and on from that, was just get away from Europe entirely. So I did a lot of reading about sort of pre-Columbian New World cultures.
All right.
And that kind of thing. And although I have hopefully not been treading on cultural toes, I've produced a world which is far more inspired by those times and places than by the kind of the knights and castles
Right.
you normally see. But actually, the big experiment, effectively, that separates it from the Shadows of the Apt is the religion and spirituality in it. Because the Insect Kingdom have no gods and no religion. Even the magic-using ones are very, very rationalist.
Yep.
And their approach to the world is an extremely logical and evidential. Have an extremely logical and evidential basis. The people in Tiger and the Wolf are extremely spiritual. They have a very numinous relationship with what they are, their souls, the animals that they take their shapes from. And I'm personally not a religious person. It's not something that has a huge impact on my life, and I really wanted to try and to use it as a way of exploring places I wouldn't normally go.
Something that you've totally and utterly intrigued me with is a castaway comment you made in an email a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about the third book in the Tales of the Apt series, and you said that you were planning to write a new piece in between now and it coming out, which might tie together the Apt or the Kingdom world and the world in your new series.
Maybe.
And that fascinates the hell out of me. Because I can't see it as yet a connection at all, so this is fascinating.
We'll just have to see them.
You tease. Okay. You say that the third book has now been delivered. Have you got a release date on that? Because the second book, by the way, we should just say, that came out, that's Bear and the Serpent, that came out a couple of weeks ago?
2 weeks ago,
yeah. So is there a release date for the third book in the series?
I'm assuming probably about the same time next year.
And do we have a title for that?
Yes, that will be The Hyena and the Hawk.
Hyena and the Hawk. Oh, I say, okay, all right. So now Adrian Tchaikovsky has delivered his second series. It's not going to be a 10-book series. It's a trilogy. It's done. It's dusted. What lies in wait now for Mr. Tchaikovsky?
Well, I've got quite a few irons in the fire at the moment. I am currently writing a project I cannot in fact talk about because the announcement has not been made. So, sorry about that. Later on in this year, towards the end of the year, I've got a book coming out with Head of Zeus called Dogs of War, which is a near-future science fiction book set around the concept of bioengineered animal soldiers.
Not insect soldiers.
Not insects.
Okay,
well, mostly not insects. suddenly recalling possible. Yes. In general, mostly, almost entirely, mostly not insect soldiers. But it's just it covers a lot of the same kind of questions I'm looking at in Children of Time, in that it's the relationship between human and non-human intelligence. And it's sort of what do we do when the things that we make turn into something we don't necessarily want? And in this case, you've got animal soldiers who effectively get cut off from the chain of command, and they start having to make their own decisions about what they're going to do, and it just sort of mushrooms from there.
And is this another one that's been delivered, or is this something you're
that should be hitting the shelves November this year.
So it's going to be another quiet year for you on the release.
Well, I've also got a novella from Solaris, which is near-future military sci-fi called Ironclads, focusing around an American invasion of Sweden. I am not even kidding.
And sorry, you think this is fiction, do you?
When I wrote, there was a whole chunk of stuff in that book that was fiction when I wrote it, which is looking very.
And I understand you might be writing new compressor novella as well at some point.
Yes, it's in the list.
You spoke about the fact that you tend to do a lot of your writing late at night. Is that purely and simply because that's when you can get the peace and quiet and the focus? Or is that something that a habit you've fallen into, or what?
I think that's how my brain works, to be honest. I mean, I think if I am recalling my 20-year-old psychology degree, people have rhythms, and there are particular times of night when you get more car crashes and things like that because of just the particular sort of cycle that people's brains go through. I have my best creative time, I think, between about 10 and 12 at night. I have known other writers who have their best creative time first thing in the morning, and it's just one of those you play to your strength. And obviously when I've got the day, I'll write for the day, but it's just, and obviously it's a very convenient time to be in the mood for writing, because yes, at that point you've got, in general you don't have other things you need to be doing. And that's what, at one point when I was living back in Reading, I was working full time, studying for my law qualification, playing a fairly large role in an amateur dramatic production, and writing a book. And at that point, if you can write the book, write the last couple of hours of the night, then that's ideal.
Picking up on your mention then of the amateur dramatics, I will say that some of my favourite of your short stories revolve around the theatre and around theatrical productions. We had one recently in the Now We Are 10 anthology, which has been picked up for one of the year's best anthologies, I think, or certainly recommended, or
year's best science fiction.
Year's best, yes, which was and it was a delight. It was one of my favourite stories in that book, and you show a real understanding and a real passion for that world. I mean, you can almost smell the grease paint and the powder, and it's a very, very engaging story, and clearly this is something that is dear to your heart. It
is. I mean, I am and have always been a terrible actor, but it is. It's one of those things. I mean, to a certain extent, live role play started to edge it out because it filled the same niche.
Yeah.
In the kind of the emotional rush I got from it, but there is something about the world of the theatre. I mean, a lot of the favourite stories I've read by other authors have been stories about theatre. Peter S. Beagle wrote some really good ones.
Yes. Yeah. I seem to remember in one of the books you actually pay tribute to him and say that this is your idea of homage to Peter S. Beagle for some of his stories, which were, yes, you're right, they had a similar affection to the whole reading of them at times. I'm sorry, I apologise now. We're going to fall back on a cliche or two. For anyone here who may be unfamiliar with your work, where would you suggest they should start reading Adrian Tchaikovsky?
I would say, depending on whether you prefer fantasy or sci-fi, Guns of the Dawn or Children of Time are probably the best because they're standalone, so you're not necessarily committing to a huge series or anything like that. They both seem pretty well regarded. I really like them, so
you go for one of those two?
Yeah.
Okay, and you heard it here, folks. You know where to start. Another second cliched question. Now, your influences are broad. You've mentioned the theatre, you mentioned Peter S. Beagle. Are there any other authors that you are conscious of having been an influence on your work?
I suspect that if you basically got it under a microscope, my work is probably has more literary fingerprints on it than I could possibly guess. It's one of the. I read all the time.
But you could say that about any author, surely.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I think I need a constant stream of new stuff to read as part of the engine that helps me write.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a number of writers I think who've been a huge influence on me that I don't in any way approach in my own style. So Gene Wolfe is definitely one of my favourites, or Mary Gentle.
Wonderful stylists, both of them, yeah.
And China Miéville
yes.
as well. But I think as far as actually feeding directly into the style, sometime before I wrote anything that was a publishable quality, I did go through a run of writing books that were kind of identifiably like particular writers, which thankfully I'm now.
So one day when you're rich and famous, they'll be coming out.
I did go through my back catalogue actually, and I didn't have to go back far before I was running into stuff that was just never really going to see the light of day. So it's one of the interesting. At the time, I obviously felt that I was writing golden prose fit for the ages, but it's one of the. I can see my own learning curve.
Isn't hindsight a wonderful thing?
Well, it's. I mean, in a sense, it's nice to know that all those years not getting published were at least partly because I was writing terrible stuff.
Okay, now I'm going to throw it open to the audience in just a minute, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Now, this is quite controversial, but it's just you and me. There's nobody else listening. Okay, so on the quiet, you've written fantasy, you've written science fiction. If you had the choice and economics didn't come into it, what would you prefer to write?
I'm not purely saying this because it's a safe answer, but it's not something I can really choose between.
That's such a politician's
It is,
answer.
but I think the reason is one of the things. The project I cannot speak of is a traditional fantasy project,
right?
And in a way that I think the echoes of the full books have not been. They've actually been quite intensive to write. And
I do love, by the way, you say the project I cannot speak of and say it in capitals. I just love that.
But one of the effectively going back to a more traditional fantasy world has made me realise just how much I was actually missing writing that kind of prose. And then it's an absolute joy to me that when I finish that, I've got a science fiction project that I can move on to. And it's a bit like with the two plots within Children of Time. It's being able to have that variety.
Yes, so it doesn't become stale. You can keep it fresh, and you can keep your own imagination and your own writing fresh. And I think that's a very important aspect. You've mentioned Children of Time. You've mentioned Guns of the Dawn. Are they the two books that you've written which, when you're dead and gone 100 years from now, when there are statues of Adrian Tchaikovsky being are these the works you'd like to be remembered for, or is there another thing you're thinking, that's really what I'd like to be remembered for?
I should probably say something mystical like, no, the book I want to be remembered for is not
yet to be written. Yes.
But I'll take any kind of remembrance I can get, to be honest.
Good answer, I like that. Okay, as I say, we've got 10 minutes till we wrap things up, so I'm just going to say now, are there any questions from our attentive and very patient audience? Gay?
You are admirably prolific.
That's one word for it.
2 words, I thought.
Yeah,
okay. Would you, this is do you have any advice for the writers of the audience on that particular subject? Because obviously you have dealt with having, getting your writing career established alongside doing all these other things in your life and being a parent and so forth. So are there particular things you felt were helps or hindrances to that?
I've got two techniques, actually, I think, which have probably contributed to my output. One of which is, when I'm not writing, whenever I've got free moment, I'm generally working out what happens next. So, even just before I go to sleep or just walking from place to place, that's kind of playing out in my head, so that when I sit down, I can get straight into it. And that's just it's not something I kind of intentionally did as, this will be a clever thing. It's just the way I think my mind works. Also, I tend to be a planner. So I plan things out. I have a very good idea of what's going on. Usually, the first draft doesn't structurally differ particularly from the thing I actually deliver, which I think saves a lot of time in going back and rewrite. So that planning at the beginning, I think, pays a lot of dividends, and when I've skipped on it, I've really felt it.
You say when you skipped on it. When have you skipped on it?
I got quite, because I'd sailed through 10 volumes of Shadows of the Alps, I got quite complacent, I think, when it came to starting the Echoes of the Fall series. And I kind of tried to do the second book a bit more seat of my pants, and I ended up rewriting quite a lot of it and going back 2 or 3 times because I hadn't really worked out where it was going. So I then had to sit down and just basically write, this is the plan.
So,
and after that, it was fine.
So although you talked about the latter books in the Shadows of the App series being quite organic, you still sat down and planned them ahead of time before you actually wrote the book?
Yes, it was just that the plan, in general, each time the plan was informed by what had happened before and the logical response of the characters and that kind of thing.
Right. Okay, are there any more questions?
It's probably not the case, but because I like the spiders so much in Children of Time, even though you've said it's a standalone novel, is there any possibility of any other works coming out in that universe?
There is. I mean, I'm kind of collecting material for it mentally. I've got an idea by now of the sort of the story I could tell. I think to a certain extent I do feel I'm working under a certain amount of pressure because it's done so well that I can't just kind of throw off a spiders in space story and say that'll do. I've got to have at least something important to say, but it's starting to come together, so you never know.
Would this be a novel or would it be short stories?
Oh, it's certainly a novel. It's certainly a novel, but
Certainly only a novel?
yes, it's another standalone in the same series of the first standalone.
That's what I...
Done.
Okay, before I ask my question, I want to say, if she's watching, big up to Annie. We missed you, wish you were here.
Yep, I'll second that.
But my question was, I saw a mock-up that happened on your timeline on Facebook when Spiderlight came out, called Kittenlight. For those people who are nervous as who are scared of spiders, is there any chance that Kittenlight could come to fruition?
Well, whilst you could obviously go through and search and replace spider for kitten throughout, I do feel that some of the scenes where nests of kittens are being torched, being burned horribly and running screaming would probably be more distressing in that version.
Really? Come on, don't let that be the image we're left with. Someone got with another question. Yes.
I don't know if the title of Children of Time was inspired by the Deep Purple song Child in Time.
No. I had not. Although, in retrospect, having a title which was both a very well-known Doctor Who reference and a Deep Space Nine episode was maybe not the best thing for Googling.
Still,
But does music have, you mentioned about literary influences, does music have any influence on the work or inspiration?
I generally write to music. I tend to write with film soundtracks, and also there's an enormous wealth of actioning music written for trailers by various sort of organisations, which is enormously useful to write fight scenes and things too.
I find it does help you get in the right frame of mind. If some of the, for whatever reason you can't quite visualise something, you kind of know what it is, but the visual is just not quite complete, and somehow a piece of music can help complete the picture.
It's also it's a good way of kind of closing off the rest of the world so you can focus as well.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yes, question. The one thing I've read of yours is Children of Time, but actually going for questions about Shadows of the App at the moment, thinking about what one's doing when one's got a really long series like that. I've watched over the years various authors writing long series, and the kind of thing I spot is that, well, if I go for a story from about 15 years back on some group all the time, and an author asked about the name of one of their characters. Well, 2 bits to the name. Have I called them up to about volume 6? Have I called them? What have I called them? Which order do the names go in? Could you please remind me? And I looked up and I went, well, in volume 3 you had them this way round, and in volume 4 you had them the other way round. fairly obviously, a number of authors try to write something that long. In the end, just lose track of relatively minor plot details from a couple of books back, which the fans will notice.
There are some things for some reason that don't stick in my mind, and I suspect that, for example, you might see a variance in eye colour and stuff like that, because for some reason I just don't register that in my sort of little mental cataloguing. In general, I think with the Shadow of the Out, I'm mostly okay. There's an interesting debate as to, for example, whether Thalric has children and how many he has, because there are some clashing points, because I obviously forgot later on that I'd made comments about it. In general, though, I think it's probably reasonably watertight, just because I was so immersed in the world when I was writing it.
You didn't use a concordance. Sorry, I should put my hand up. You didn't use a concordance for Shadow of the Axe. You didn't have like a
cards.
Yeah, like a
No,
spreadsheet.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I've occasionally had to refer back to previous books, basically, which obviously these days when you can just search the entire manuscript is so much easier than it used to be. But no, I mean, mostly just all in here.
Wow.
But again, you know what? I think that's another thing that gets trained by running role-playing campaigns, because you tend to have all the stuff on your fingers there without sort of scrabbling through your records for it.
Because the players have suddenly decided to go over there. So where you tell them to go.
Me again. So, because you have managed to actually finish a 10-book series, awesome. You've gone way beyond what that guy did with
The Thing.
So, when HBO did the series,
Thanks, Steve.
you know him, not Tolkien, the other guy, with lots of names, lots of initials. Anyway, when HBO do, that's the guy I mean. When HBO do this,
It was lovely.
Yeah, really nice. Straight
well,
up.
very gentle hands. When HBO do the series, what prop would you like to see carted round from convention to convention for photo opportunities?
An enormous papier-mâché praying mantis.
Not a spider.
It's not there are spiders, but as far as actual character goes, there is an enormous praying mantis which is a character and has a name and dialogue and so forth.
How big is it?
It
Would it fit in here?
just about fit in here. Just.
I also would like to see
Right, well, unfortunately our time is up. So on behalf of the BSFA, on behalf of all those here, I would like to say a big thank you to the one, the only, Mr. Adrian Tchaikovsky. I should just mention that Adrian does have a few books here. Okay, I have a few books here of Adrian, which very reasonable for those who would like them signed. I just thought I'd pass that off and mention that in passing. So, but thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Adrian. Thank you. That's going to go okay.
Yeah, tickets, yes. We now have.